Hi there, and welcome to another English Extra video. Now, this is a short video which is just revision for second years about word classes. Word classes are so important when you're writing about CLD in the exam or you're doing your NEA language investigation. If you can use really precise AO1 terms on word classes, then you're going to score high points. So make sure that you use these terms nicely. You should see on the screen there this table with the 8 word classes of English in black on the left and the definitions of those word classes in blue in the middle, and then some examples on the right hand side. So what you need to do is you need to match the 3 things together. So if you haven't already done so, pause the video and do this matching exercise. Okay, right, I'm assuming that you've had a go of it, so let's do the answers. Let's start with noun. Right, so a noun there is this one. So it's a word that names a person, place, thing, or idea. So memorize that, a person, place, thing, or idea. They're the very root of language. We wouldn't have any language at all if we didn't have nouns. When you use lots of nouns, for example, you use lots of ending tion nouns, like information, that's called nominalization. And often, if a text has a lot of these nominalized forms, then it's quite a high level of register. Okay, so when you're looking at occupational jargon, for example, you'll often see a lot of nominalization where nouns are being used instead of good everyday verbs. Nouns can be, as it says on the bottom here, if it weren't being partially masked, proper. Proper means it starts with a capital letter and it's specific. So, for example, Manchester United is a proper noun. So they can be proper, or they can be the opposite of that. They can be common, which is a word that you would find in a dictionary. Words can be abstract or concrete. Now, those sound like binary opposites. Abstract things that are things that cannot be seen, and concrete things which can be seen and touched. The point about a lot of nouns is that they're actually somewhere in the middle. So think of abstraction and concrete qualities as being on a continuum where obviously a table is concrete and love, whatever that is abstract. But there are lots of things in the middle, like, for example, the word battle. You could say, oh, battle, that's a concrete noun because I can see people killing themselves with swords. So that's concrete. But on the other hand, you might say, well, I'm having a real battle with this homework, therefore I'm using it in a more kind of metaphorical or figurative way. It's the idea of it. So that's abstract. Okay, so it depends on the context of the sentence. And finally, in terms of nouns, you've also got collective nouns as well, like a swarm of flies. So we've done nouns. We now move on to verbs. Now, when you first learnt about different word classes, you would have learnt that a verb is an action word. And that's right, a verb can be an action word. It's this one over here. But it also can be lots of other things as well. So a verb can show states of being, action, or events. And in English language A level, we tend to pin on them these 4 different types of verbs. You've got material verbs, which means, well, AKA dynamic verbs, which is something that you can see being done, like kick, for example, is a material verb. So if you were looking at a transcript of a football commentary, for example, the expectation is that you would see lots of material verbs in there. Relational verbs is verbs that relate together to ideas. So, for example, if I say Darlington is wonderful, the lights have gone off when I said Darlington is wonderful. Darlington is wonderful, and that's the is bit there is a relational verb. Perhaps a better word to use here is the copular verb. So the copular verb is often used in discourse texts, for example, when writers are trying to persuade you over to a point of view. And so they'll use the verb to be to give a sense that something is absolutely certain, as in that example, Darlington is wonderful. So the copular verb is a kind of relational verb. And then we have mental verbs, which are obviously things that are going on with your thoughts and feelings, like I believe. And then you've got verbal verbs as well, which means how something is said. So said, exclaimed, whispered, etc. So those are all verbs. Excuse me for 1 second while I switch the light on. Right, thank you. I've put the money in the meter. Right, adjective. So an adjective, let me find that one. Yes, an adjective is a word that modifies a noun. It can be base, comparative, or superlative. So look at where the adjective is in relation to the noun. If the adjective is coming before the noun, that makes it a pre-modifying adjective. If the adjective is going after the noun, then it's obviously a post-modifying adjective. Now that can be significant because if it's a pre-modifying adjective, then the adjective is colouring your judgment about the noun even before the noun has been uttered. So if I say that brilliant singer, okay, then by the time I get to the noun singer, then you've already got a positive impression of them. So the pre-modifying adjective, again, can have quite a persuasive, subjective kind of effect on how we perceive the noun. Okay, so you've got pre-modifying adjectives and post-modifying adjectives, and you've got the base form, which is the form that you'd find in a dictionary, like, for example, brilliant. And then you've got the comparative form, which for polysyllabic words like brilliant, where it means that you're going to put the adverb more in front of it, more brilliant. And then you've got the superlative form, which would be most brilliant. Okay, we now move on to adverbs. And we'll talk a little bit more about adverbs later on after having done this table. But adverbs are words that modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. So they've got multiple uses, which we'll talk about in a minute. We have connectives. So connections, let's have a look. See if I can find it. Okay, obviously it's there. So a connective provides connections between phrases, clauses, and sentences. Can be coordinating and it can be subordinating. So a coordinating connective is a word like and, where you're taking two clauses and you're kind of gluing them together. Those two equal clauses, you're gluing them together. I'm going to Darlington and I'll be having a cup of tea in Nero. Right, so the and bit is gluing together two clauses. I'm going to Darlington, I'm having a cup of tea in Nero. So that's a coordinating connective, whereas a subordinating connective is a word like, for example, if or because, where you're actually introducing a subordinating clause. If it rains, I'll bring a brolly. So if it rains is the subordinating clause there, and the main clause in that sentence is I'll bring a brolly. Okay, so if something features a subordinating connective, then that means by definition it's a complex sentence. So if you're looking at a transcript of a 5 or a 6-year-old and they're saying things like, if it rains, can we bring the boy, like that, then you're going to point out that, you know, here is the ability of the child to construct complex sentences using subordinating connectives. Right, moving on to prepositions. So prepositions provide connections between words, often showing a sense of place and time. So this is your to, from, in, under. Again, on CLD, when you're looking at transcripts of children speaking, to what extent can they manipulate a range of different prepositions? And you could link that in with Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development. The penultimate one here is pronouns. Now, pronouns is that one. So pronouns substitute for a noun, often used anaphorically or cataphorically. So a pronoun either refers back to something that's previously referenced. That's called an anaphoric reference. Or they can reference something which is going to be explained in more detail later on. That's a cataphoric reference. So, for example, Paul Heselton started the video. He was wearing a black shirt. Now, the he on the he was wearing a black shirt, that's an anaphoric reference because it's referring back to Paul Heselton. Imagine the time that's saved by having pronouns. Imagine how difficult life would be if we didn't have pronouns. If every time we had to say, Paul Heselton started the lesson, Paul Heselton was wearing a black shirt. So pronouns are wonderful because they save us a heck of a lot of time. The opposite of that, cataphoric, is often a literary or journalistic device. Imagine a short story that starts like this. He started the lesson. He was wearing a black shirt. Yes, it was Paul Heselton's lesson. So those first two pronouns there, they're cataphoric references, where as a reader you're thinking, who is this person? What is the lesson? Why is he wearing a black shirt? So it kind of builds up interest and intrigue. Okay, so those are some of the uses for pronouns. And then finally, we have determiners, which do this thing. They add detail and clarity to nouns, often describing the number or possessor. So, for example, the numbers like 33, for example, over here, that is a determiner. Or the definite article of the is a determiner as well. Okay, so if we look down here, so these are your pronouns. And, because, and if they are your connectives, that's a coordinating connective, and those are subordinating connectives. Here we've got a whole bunch of nouns. That's a proper noun, that's a common noun, that's an abstract noun. We have a couple of adjectives over here. Here we've got our determiners. We've got the definite article over here. We've got a quantifier, 33 over there. Here we've got three verbs. We've got a material verb, smack. We've got decide, which is a mental verb, and we've got a whisper, which is a verbal verb, which I always do in a Liverpudlian accent for no apparently good reason. We've got very, fast, and tenderly, which are different forms of adverbs, more about them in a minute. And then we've got during, under, and on, which are all prepositions. Okay. You can differentiate between open lexical word classes and closed grammatical word classes. So these ones over here are fundamental to meaning. Your nouns, your verbs, your adjectives and adverbs, you wouldn't be able to say very much very meaningful if you didn't have these things in them. They're called open word classes because they're open to new membership. You know, every day there are, dozens of new words internationally that are pouring into the language. And so these tends to be nouns, verbs, adjectives and adverbs. On the other hand, you've got these grammatical words, things like pronouns and determiners and connectives and prepositions. These are the smaller grammatical words. They're important, but they're closed word classes because you don't tend to get new ones being invented. Okay, so that's useful when you're looking at CLD and telegraphic speech and you're trying to work out the difference between words that the child is articulating in their sentences and words that they are omitting for some reason. It's often the difference between open and closed word classes. Right, adverbs. Just going to talk for 5 minutes about adverbs. Adverbs are really important and they can be easily neglected, but they're absolutely fundamental to meaning. Adverbs are mostly used to modify verbs, but they can modify nouns and adjectives too. So they're quite multi-purpose. There are different kinds of adverbs and you need to learn these. The ones that you learned at primary school, where your primary school teacher said, well, an adverb describes a verb and it ends in ly. Well, that's your adverb of manner, so how something is done. He talks incessantly, so that's your adverb of manner. But there are, 5 other types of adverbs which are very important. We have adverbs of place and we have adverbs of time. So an adverb of place tells you where something is happening. So the example would be, the book is here. Now that's deictical. Obviously you've got to be there in that place talking to that person to know where here is. So therefore it's often a feature of speech rather than writing. So you've got adverbs of place and then you've got adverbs of time when something is happening. So the word today, for example, is an adverb of time. Incidentally, these don't have to be just single words because adverbials are groups of words that have the same function. So if I say, well, I'll meet you on the bottom of Duke Street in round about half an hour, I'm using an adverbial of place down at the bottom of Duke Street and an adverbial of time in around about half an hour. We then have some other kinds of adverbs. We have adverbs of duration that tells you how long something happens. Ages, for example. We have adverbs of frequency, how often something takes place. Often, sometimes, occasionally, never, always, rarely, etc. Adverbs of frequency. And then you've got adverbs of degree, which are like so important. So these tell the extent to which something is done, like totally. We completely get it. So when we are conversing with people and often converging with them, we use a lot of these adverbs of degree in order to show that we are in agreement with them. We think and feel in the same way as them. Okay, so as I mentioned, adverbs, there are adverbials as well. So adverbials means groups of words which has a function of an adverb. There are three functions here that you could hone in on. So adverbs and adverbials, they often reveal the attitude of the writer or the speaker to what they're saying. Now look at the underlined bits in these sentences. These are adverbs and adverbials. And if you haven't come across these before, just pause the video and try and think, well, what do these underlined words actually do to the meanings of the sentences? So on the first one here, the driver had supposedly not been drinking. So this adverb here kind of denotes skepticism, that there's an element of doubt about what the driver is saying. So that's pretty fundamental and important to the semantics of the sentence. This adverbial over here, according to the barman, is similar to that in that it suggests that the statement that's being made is a bit subjective, that it's one person's perspective, and maybe it's not to be totally believed. Okay, so it's revealing something of the attitude of the writer or the speaker towards the statement that's being made. These ones over here are interesting because adverbs can be used to either soften or strengthen the force of a statement. So I only wanted to find out how much it cost. The only bit there is a mitigating adverb. Now look out for these. These are used all the time. Often when people want you to do things, maybe against your will, they'll use an adverb like only or just to give the sense that they're not actually prevailing upon you very much. So these are called mitigating adverbs. The opposite of that is an intensifying adverb, like I really wanted to find out how much it cost. So this kind of strengthens the force of a statement. So that's called an intensifying adverb. And then finally, you've got these adverbs which function as discourse markers. So in everyday speech, obviously, we can't see where we're moving from one topic to another in a way that you would if it was on printed text, where you'd see the beginning of a paragraph. So you signal, moving on to a new topic by using discourse markers. So now I want to move on to discourse. So that's an adverb of time, and it's signaling a topic change. And it could be something like, for the final language level, let's look. And so the word final there is signaling to the listener that we're onto a new topic. So they're pretty fundamental to meaning. And you can say a lot about text simply from looking at the adverbs and adverbials. I wonder what your knowledge of pronouns is like. So if you haven't done this, you need to stop the video and you need to fill in these boxes. So you need to know the difference between first, second, and third person pronouns, and between singular and plural and subject and object forms. So for example, the first person singular subject form of the pronoun is I. So pause the video and fill in the rest of the box. Okay, I'm assuming that you filled that in. So just a few words about these then. So all of these are first person pronouns. I is the first person singular subject pronoun. That's the way to talk about it, the order that you put the words. So it's the first person singular subject pronoun. When you're looking at children's language development, it may well be that you're observing that a 2-year-old child is saying things like me go to the park. And that's the point where you say, aha, the child here is using a first person singular object rather than subject form of the pronoun. And that's significant because they won't have heard an adult say that. And that's where you mentioned Chomsky's nativist language acquisition device. So those are your first person singular pronouns. And these are your first person plural pronouns, we, us, and our. So look at persuasive texts, for example, on your discourse articles. Look at the extent to which the writer or speaker is using first person plural pronouns, because they're often used as a persuasive tool. Use the word collective or inclusive. So, the writer uses the first person plural subject pronoun we to give a sense of collective inclusion. You could also throw in that word that we looked at last week, synthetic personalization. So they are often persuasive tools. In English, your second person pronouns are easy. The light's gone off again. Let me switch that back on. Here I am. So you and your, they are second person pronouns. The easy thing in English is that they don't change between the singular and the plural form, which makes things very easy because you can address a single person with you, and you can use the same form to address a collective group of people. So again, when you're doing that synthetic personalization, it makes things easy because you can make your advertisement feel like it's addressing a single individual as well as a whole mass of people. So those are second person pronouns. And over here, we have our third person pronouns. We have, of course, quite a lot of debates about the use of gendered pronouns in third person and whether actually we should be using these plural forms, even when grammatically, we're talking about a singular person. Okay, so get used to using those terms. And I would say just keep practicing, get somebody to say to you, them, me, our, she, and you just label the forms. Okay, that's not the end of pronouns because those were personal pronouns, and there are other forms of pronouns as well. So you've got interrogative pronouns. So these are words that introduce questions like which, who, where, and whose. You've got demonstrative pronouns like this, that, these, and those. These are pointing words that demonstrate where things are. Okay, but again, like we said before, they are deictical, so it's likely to be found in speech. We have relative pronouns, which are slightly trickier because they look like interrogative pronouns, but actually they're not asking a question. What they're doing is introducing relative clauses. So I see what you mean. So I see there is the main clause, and then the what you mean bit is the subordinate clause, which is introduced by a relative pronoun. Okay, so again, in CLD, if you've got a child that's using relative pronouns, what they're doing is they're constructing unconsciously complex sentences, and therefore it's a marker of quite a high level of language development. And then finally, you've got reflexive pronouns. These are just pronouns that have got self put on the end, myself, ourself, yourself. Now, if you are sitting in my class at this moment, then I would now give you an envelope full of a jumble of different words, and you would have a lot of fun putting together a poem, a kind of Dadaist random poem, where you'd put the words together to form a 6-line poem that could rhyme, and then you'd label all of the word classes. You could do that. Alternatively, you could just take any kind of random text, like pick up a novel that happens to be on your bookshelf, and then take the first paragraph of it and try and label the word classes as much as possible. The final thing I'd say on word classes is that they are utterly dependent upon the sentence that they're in. Okay, so one word isn't necessarily one word class all the time. Take the word alert. I'm taking this from the e-magazine article that I photocopied for my group. So listen to the use of the word alert in these 3 sentences. The alert went out at 1 a.m. So there, the alert went out at 1 a.m. Alert there is a noun. But listen to this sentence. The security guard will alert the police of any intruder. Now there it's used as a verb, isn't it? It's something that the security guard is doing. Okay, so that's a verb. And then thirdly, an alert resident heard the noise. Now alert there is an adjective. Okay, it's describing the resident. So the main point on this is that the word class that it is contextual, and it depends upon the sentence that it's housed in. That's all I'm going to say about word classes today. If you can get hold of this magazine article from e-magazine, it's called Linguistic Housekeeping, Grammatical Messiness. It's a very good article that will consolidate some of the things that we've said. Thank you.